Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the first episode of 2025. I'm Ted Farrell, your host of All Things Litigation Funding. We are delighted to have really one of the top people in the business, Kirstine Rogers from Certum. Kirstine, thank you so much for joining us. Can you give us a little bit on your background, and then we'll get into it?
Sure. Thank you first for those very kind words. I don't know that they're deserved, but thank you.
Some of the kindest I could find.
Maybe a little bit of embellishment to start off the year. I don't know.
That's the key. That's right.
So yeah, my background is I am like most, not all, but most people who are in the litigation funding space. I am a litigator by trade. My path to this industry is a little bit different. I started off in Dallas at one of the biggest firms and oldest firms at the time in Dallas, Thompson & Knight, in the trial section where my practice was quite varied. It was a time when there was still some liberty to have a variety of cases. So we still had some remnants of some insurance defense work, which allowed for some smaller, case management on my own. And then we had a larger toxic tort docket. And then we had just straight up commercial litigation. So I was very, very lucky. I'm not sure that associates are now these days at larger firms to have such a varied practice with varying levels of responsibility and control. I was there for about 6.5 years and and thought that's probably what I would do for the rest of my career. I was given a very spontaneous opportunity to clerk for a judge, which was something that I had not done, obviously, prior to starting as an associate. And it's something that I felt like I really had missed out on. And it seemed like all the law clerks had a special secret that I didn't have.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to clerk. I think I'm going to knock that out maybe next
year. I'm telling you.
It's on my dream board.
But you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, like that sort of thing where everyone sort of has the sense of things that I didn't have. And so I was able to do it and thought I would do it for a year or maybe 2 and ended up doing it for 10 years. In the Eastern District of Texas. And it was sort of a component of my career that really shaped the way I look at risks now. And it gave me an understanding of litigation that you really don't have until you understand how the court functions. It's a person reading the brief. It's a person who is not, or maybe someday it will be AI, but it's not. It's a person with thoughts and experiences and a life outside of reading your emergency motion to compel something or other.
You mean your emergency motion to reconsider the denial of the emergency motion as non-emergent? Yes.
It really shaped the way, and I really thought maybe my path was trending toward that, something in the judicial branch. And then I just, again, had sort of a pivot realization of, I really want to take some of these skills and use them in practice. So I went back to practice at a smaller firm in Dallas, a litigation boutique, where we focused on both defense and plaintiff's work, but more plaintiff's work. I had a nice balance. At Thompson Knight, I had a little bit of plaintiff's work, mainly defense. Then I went to the court where it was totally neutral. And then I was at the smaller firm where I had more plaintiff's work, but some defense work. And that really sort of rounded things out. And then I started doing some outside counsel work for Certum, which was then risk settlements. Evaluating some risks, and found it was this perfect balance of my entire career experience. It was the neutrality and getting to the right answer, which is what I loved about clerking. I loved trying to figure out the puzzle, which is so much of underwriting of litigation funding. But then there's a overlay in our industry of understanding venue concerns and counsel concerns and settlement implications and all those other layers that don't factor into a judge's decisions at all. But very much, affect the outcome of a case. So that's how I ended up where I am.
Right. So you kind of stepped on my first question. It's sort of like I had this great plan, but here we go. So it might sound like that, and I do ask everybody who comes on the show because I think a lot of people look. There's people who listen. Who are trying to get into the business, right? Like sort of what was your entry point?
Yeah.
So what I ask is, but it sounds like you did some work for Certum, was, what was the first time you sort of became aware of or were involved in a case where there was either funding or you sought funding? So sort of like, what was sort of like your first look at this business that exists?
So it was actually before I started doing outside counsel work. It was when I was back out of clerking and back at the smaller litigation boutique, and I was looking for funding. We had a great case that was going to be very, very expensive. Clients who again were in the circumstances leading up to the litigation. The great facts for litigation for a plaintiff often mean that they're damaged and strapped for cash to pay for experts.
You
right?
took all my money, therefore I have no
Yes.
money to pay for someone to go get my money back. Right?
Yes. And so I was approached by a former colleague to discuss co-counseling a case, and started sort of investigating this potential. And the reason that we were initially approached is because I was at a firm that did contingency fee work that was used to funding, essentially self-funding cases, right? Paying for expert cost. And we looked at the case from that angle. And then we also said, wait a second, there's this thing called litigation funding. And I'm based in Dallas, and funding had not quite taken, and still doesn't have the same prominence that it might on the East Coast. So it was a little bit unfamiliar and, quite frankly, a little bit scary to me. I thought it sounded very surprising that a third party would essentially give you money on a non-recourse basis.
Right.
And it sounded a little too good to be true. Now, of course, I'm on the other side of it. I see how much work and effort is put into assuring that those cases are as good as everyone says they are and will result in the way
they're better. They're even better than everyone says.
Yes, right? Yes, exactly. Right. Never. Never. Right. But so that's how I got to know a few people in the industry, and that's sort of how I dipped my toe in the water. It was unrelated to Certum, but that's how I sort of became familiar with how it works and the underwriting process, and sort of this, again, not a secret, but a little known in our local bar resource, or maybe it's more that it's a well-kept secret by a lot of people. A lot of cases were funded, but no one really talks about it. Right. So I learned a lot about it through that process.
Right. And so I want to pick up on something you said, because I think this is sort of interesting, and I think in a lot of ways sort of demystifies the business. So, and by the way, I had the same thought. So we're at, the first time I ever looked at a funded case, I was in a big law firm, and we thought, it's amazing that people would underwrite this case and on a non-recourse base do this. However, at your contingent fee firm, you were doing all of this legal work and footing the bill for outside experts,
right,
with no recourse if you lose. Exactly. So it, in a lot of ways, it's, well, look, you're underwriting the same risk.
Right. Exactly. 100%. It's the same. And we can talk about this more later, of course, but I think that's something that's really important to me when we're looking at a case from an underwriting perspective. I often ask, do these lawyers, it's not necessarily will they work on contingency, because some firms simply don't allow it. And I think we're empathetic to that concern. And but do they have a contingency fee lawyer spirit? There's sort of a spirit that comes with practicing law and, betting your time and often lots of your money on the success and viability of a case. And you make choices in that case based on the fact that you're spending money on it, and in a way that maybe you don't when the client's footing the bill. And that's just the reality of practicing like a contingency fee lawyer. And when I say that, I think that when you're a contingency fee lawyer, you make much more strategic, thoughtful decisions. If you're footing the bill for the expert, you probably should be sure that they will satisfy Daubert, because you will have just sunk all those costs into that expert's time. Right. Expert's still going to charge you the money regardless of sound methodology, right? So let's make sure that it's sound. And if the client's footing the bill, I'm not saying that you don't care about that, but the considerations are different.
Right. And I think the sort of the ethos is, I woke up this morning and I did these 18 tasks on the litigation. I think as a plaintiff's lawyer, the 18 you would pick might be different than the defense lawyer, because you're just doing them to try to win, as opposed to preserve objections. Right. Like, what is getting us, what's getting us here from point A to point B. And of course, if it's your money and your skin in the game, you're going to think twice. And you might do a lot of the same things, but I think you're right that there's that idea of, what are we doing to win and recover, as opposed to what are we doing to write the greatest opposition to request for production 14 in the history of objections.
Exactly. What is the pathway to success, right? And I think that it's just a different. That being said, I think that it is my experience on the defense side of the docket, and a great amount of a great amount of the people that make up Certum in particular have experience on both sides of the docket. It's critical, right, to have that exact mindset that you were just talking about, preserve, preserve, preserve. We know that, and we have to be ready to anticipate those arguments and anticipate where is the point where this no longer makes sense for anyone, unless it's a judgment, which is also fine and we're prepared for. But where is the point where this does not make sense for a defendant to solely focus on 7 years down the road when all appeals have been exhausted?
Right.
That's critical. And to anticipate, what are the arguments that are going to be raised early? What are the arguments? What's going to come down the road? What's, jury arguments. And again, I think there are the best of contingency fee lawyers do that, but not all contingency fee lawyers do, right? So we have to function like the best of the contingency fee lawyers and the best of the defense lawyers, and the best of the defense lawyers know when there's a stopping point, right? The best of defense lawyers are not the ones who say we're going to die on this hill for every single hill, or the ones that know, okay, this is a reasonable position, let's take a look. So I think that's the way we come at it, knowing that there's a lot of extraneous other unreasonable folk and how we deal with them.
Yeah, and I think the best plaintiffs' lawyers, when they're thinking about bringing a case and where it's going to be, they'll look up the pattern jury instructions in that breach contract case, and they'll say, these are the elements, and they'll start ripping documents in for elements 1, 2, 3, and 4, and what do we have, and build back from there. So let me ask you this. So you're at Certum now. And again, I was saying this before, but there are people who listen and I hear from who were like you and like me, who wanted to get in the business. So the question would be, give me a little bit on your day to day in your seat, and also too a little bit of background on Certum, because you obviously have a very overt insurance strategy. Some places have a more have insurance-backed investments. Maybe that's the sort of like not the public-facing thing. So a little bit on what you're doing, day to day, besides podcasts and other, huge media hits.
Yeah.
Huge media hits.
So let me talk a little bit about Certum first. Certum grew out of, was formerly known as Risk Settlements, and Certum grew out of a product developed by our founder, a litigator, that is an insurance product that's in the class action space. It's actually class action settlement insurance, but it grew out of experience from a litigator. And through that, as the worlds of contingent risk insurance and funding started sort of blending, Certum started taking on more insurance risks in the funding like space. Not necessarily, and that became a kind of a third step, but originally contingent risk insurance, and still it very much is, judgment preservation insurance, adverse judgment insurance, which involves evaluating a case-specific risk for either a plaintiff or defendant and determining whether there's some amount of insurance that could be purchased by the plaintiff or defendant for a premium to ensure a certain result, right? A certain set result of this, either as to the plaintiff, we've looked at the merits of your case. We think at the end of the day, you will take away at least $10 million from this case. Or for a defendant, it could be, we've looked at your case and we do not believe your exposure is either anything, we think you should win this case, or we don't believe your exposure is more than 10 million, and we will pay for a certain amount over that if it is. And those are entirely based, that evaluation and the issuance of those policies, and Certum serves as a managing general agent for several insurance companies, including Berkshire Hathaway, for this type of insurance. That is all based on the merits of the case, 100% merits of the case. A lot less of the sort of subjectivities that come in with funding, right? But Certum really started gaining momentum in that space, and then also developed a funding arm. So we have an insurance arm and a funding arm. And we also sort of like to think of ourselves as a risk transfer platform. So there really is possibly a third bucket of risk that we're interested in that may look like some combination of funding and insurance, or it may be evaluation, a third party evaluation of risk. We're very much interested in looking at the merits of risks and figuring out how we can solve for the problem, whether that be insurance or funding. And the funding that we do is traditional funding. Then I think what has happened and what you've seen, Ted, is sort of the development of the insurance world and the funding world really blending, and the funding world using the insurance world to free up capital that otherwise was captive by any sort of funding. And we've worked on a lot of those deals too. So that's when they sort of come and blend together. We wear all the hats. We don't wear them all in the same transaction,
Right.
but we wear all the hats.
Right. And I think, it's funny. So you're hitting on these buckets. But I'm thinking back to your time as a contingent fee plaintiff's lawyer. You were taking all the risks of recovery, and in return, the client is going to pay you 30, 40% of the outcome. And there you have all the risks. So one thing that I have really found interesting about insurance is that a lot of people and a lot of marketing goes out to say insurance is the way to is the way to hedge risk in the space. And I think, by the way, look, I love insurance-backed deals. I spend a ton of time on them. But, I mean, funding is risk transfer, right? I have between a 0 and 100% chance of recovering 33% of this massive claim.
Yep.
But I don't want to take all the risk. So I will take down some funding along the way so I can pay these 4 associates who are going to have to work on this night and day. I can pay the experts and all that stuff. So I've found it very interesting that, and I think, by the way, it's good for the business that with insurance, I think weirdly insurance has made more people open to funding because it is a different type of risk transfer. Of course, the difference being that insurance provides you no liquidity along the 5 years to win the case, whereas the funding does.
Well, and we're probably going off track here because I will talk about how I made the decision and what I do on a daily basis. But as to this sort of funding in the insurance and the funding world, I've been sort of the voice of, and maybe sometimes a minority voice of caution, because as the worlds meld, we have to make sure, for the exact reasons you're saying, insurance has made funding more attractive to some. It's a very precarious situation, because unless all interests are aligned and every party at the table is wearing some of the risk, it does not work. The reason that the funding returns are what they are is because the funder is taking on a huge risk. The minute 100% of that risk is placed on an insurance carrier, it doesn't work. The interests don't work. The parties aren't aligned to work together. And the same is true very much, I think, for most of what we think of with our cases, is if lawyers don't have some skin in the game in our funded cases, that makes them much less interesting to us, because there is no risk. They're not holding any of the risk. Everyone's got to hold a little bit of the risk. So the one thing that I've been sort of screaming from the rooftops as we continue to blend these worlds is, let's make sure that the funder is not shifting 100% of the risk to us, and when we're wearing a carrier hat or acting on behalf of the carriers, because the insurance carriers get none of the upside, right? So the risk.
I don't know.
Well, they can.
In a lot of policies,
right?
They get a huge.
But if it's structured in a way, unless it is structured in that way, you have to make sure that everyone shares in the. And it's less in sharing in the upside, Ted, to me, as it is in sharing in the downside.
Right.
Otherwise, you've got to keep everyone incentivized toward the end, the goal line of success, whatever that looks like: judgment, settlement, some sort of resolution.
I'll tell you this.
That's for me the issue that I've said we really wanted to see at the table in the insurance world, and we have it, and that's great. Right. And now everyone has to make sure that we're all working together.
Right. In my humble musings as a titan of finance, I will tell you this. Most people who I meet, their appetite for upside risk is insatiable. So if you want to dump upside risk, Kirsten, let me tell you, I can place it for you. But boy, that downside risk, right? Nobody likes
Nobody
that
wants the
downside
downside.
risk.
That's what I'm saying. It's the
Yeah, I
sharing
agree.
of the
No,
downside.
for sure.
We just all have to be very mindful of that.
I agree.
So I will pause. Do you want me to pause that and go back, or you tell me?
No, it's look, everyone's sick of hearing from me. So no, please keep going.
Well, no, I was just but this kind of goes to what my day-to-day at Certum looks like, because the question sort of has been, well, insurance and funding, how are they the same and how are they different? And the reality is, on a day-to-day basis, my work is the same, because my work is, in addition to talking to great people like you, but that's true on the funding side and the insurance side. Of course, you're one of my favorites, without question.
Top 5?
Top 5, of course.
Love it.
Yes, without question. But it's really looking at cases and evaluating them now, and it's the same process for looking at the cases from the outset. Now, at the end of the day, when sort of all the data is put in your brain and you're churning through the analysis, what the ultimate outcome looks like may be different, whether it's insurance or funding. But the biggest question always is, and I've said this to so many of my former colleagues, do you have a good case? It's that simple.
Right.
I mean, that's the question, and that's true for insurance, and it's true for funding, and it's true for whatever is in between, whatever combination in between. And then the next question, I think, always is, who are the lawyers and what is the state of play? That's important for insurance and funding as well. I think the one aspect that it comes into play with funding that doesn't come into play with insurance is collectability is a concern on the funding side, and it's usually our policies exclude collectability. That being said, on a day-to-day basis, my average day looks like, this is a world, no mystery to anyone who's probably listening to this, if they're in the industry. It's full of a lot of calls with a lot of different people. It's a lot of engagement. We have a pretty highly engaged underwriting team, as far as engaged with the outside world. We don't really we don't underwrite in a vacuum. We engage pretty frequently with the clients and the lawyers. And so my average day really is a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's like a great, active, diverse litigation docket. I'm looking at different cases involving different things. Sometimes doing legal research, sometimes on a call with an attorney about either research I've done or something I've read in the briefing. And then there's some also, we're pretty robust internal team as far as internal diligence, talking through issues. So usually I think my day is probably equally balanced with calls with the outside world and calls with our internal team, various members on various cases or projects or initiatives or things we're investigating, to sort of go through, again, always with us, it's sort of like strengths, weaknesses. How do we solve for the weaknesses? If we can't solve for the weaknesses, we move on. But my day isn't all that different from, again, a litigator's sort of docket day when you're not getting ready for a hearing. We don't really have that sort of big day of preparing, but otherwise it's a lot of looking at cases, evaluating cases, but definitely not in a vacuum. And definitely not in an isolated sort of briefing period of time, right? Like, I'm not in a hole for 8 days looking at one general case. I'm usually looking at various things at once, which is good because it keeps your brain fresh and it keeps you sort of agile. And it's one of the reasons why I was drawn to this business and taken away from litigation is, one of my biggest fears was, am I going to be bored? Right? Not bored for sure. Never bored. But it's sort of, I think it's 50-50 engagement with the outside world, which is counsel, brokers like you or others, and then 50% internal, because that's extremely important to the way our team functions. We are very team based. Everyone has a vote, everyone has a thought. We have lots of larger group meetings where everyone is heard, everyone's briefed on the cases that people are digging into. We usually, more than one of us usually digs in on a particular case at a time. So we sort of are doing things in tandem and looking at different aspects of a case. So that's my day.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you a question now. And because I was trained as a lawyer, I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask you. So, because I hear this from people a lot. So you litigated for a long time, you clerked for a long time, and now you look at all this stuff. Are you a better lawyer than you were when you joined Certum?
No. Yes, of course.
Right. I mean, because you just think, you know what it is? You get away from the day-to-day traps that, by the way, when you're in practice, you have to pay attention to everything, every deadline. And so your headspace, rightfully so, is in those places. But now it's just a more holistic view of the chess game that these cases are, I think. And I hear it, like, people tell me this stuff all the time. And then they say, of course, and by the way, I'd never want to have to go back and play that chess game anymore.
Right.
Like,
No, I
live.
think
But yeah.
that's right. And I think, listen, in all candor, I think I had my first experience of that with clerking because my clerking was so long and for so many years that, I soon learned that the idea that my baby is the prettiest, my case is the best. Just everyone thinks their emergency is the biggest emergency. Everyone,
Yeah, I
the same
know.
is true with funding. Everyone thinks that their case is the best case we will have ever seen. And the reality, and I don't mean to say that cynically. I just mean to say that realistically, of the lawyers that I enjoy working with the most on the funding side, which is also true about when I was a clerk. And honestly, I think if I were to ever practice again, and during my period of practice between clerking and Certum, it is the lawyers who are realistic about their case. And I've said this before, and I'll say this again. When I get it, I appreciate a lawyer who says to me, "Hey, we know this may be a defense that the other side's going to raise, or this is my concern about this case. Here's the thing."
Right.
If you tell me that you think this case is great and there are no warts, I am not interested in your case because it says to me you're not being realistic. If you say to me, I know, we've looked for warts. This is the one thing that could be a problem, and here's how we solve for it. I
Mhm.
like you more. I like you even better if you say, listen, we're aware of this potential defense. Here are all the reasons why you should not be worried about it. And some
Mhm.
of it may be a structural thing with the funding. It may not, it may be that it could prevail. Or when I talk to you about a defense or an issue that I'm concerned about, I appreciate you saying, I hear what you're saying, and that's right. And here's why you will have only deployed this, it's drip funding. You will have only deployed
Right.
this much capital. And so if you look at it, the gamble is worth it. Tell me that. I don't want to be told something. I don't want to be sold a bill of goods. I want you to be frank. And this goes to sort of the importance of counsel. And this is true for both insurance and funding, is it's a partnership. And I need to trust you. We are giving you, and the funding side, we are giving you capital without any promises that we're getting it back.
Right.
And so candor is so important. And again, I learned that when I clerked. I see so many lawyers, 30-year lawyers, who still haven't learned the importance of just candor. It's
Right.
okay to say that your case isn't perfect. It really is. Because it's what both cases, the defense and the plaintiff side, are both have imperfections. Somebody's going to win, right? I mean, it's not a matter of, oh, you have a flaw, therefore you lose automatically. That's not the way litigation works. And if you have a bad witness or if you have something you're concerned about, let's talk about it. We're willing to, although we have no technical say in the case, I love collaborating with lawyers on their funded cases and
Mhm.
saying, have you thought about this? Or could you raise this argument? Would that help? And I want them to say, no, we thought about that. It won't help. And here's why. I don't need to be told that I'm right. I'm really genuinely trying to, again, as I said in the beginning, I like to solve the puzzle. I like to
Mhm.
figure out the path to yes, but also like what's the right path? What's the correct? I don't want to
Yeah.
just make an argument just to make it. I want it to say, is this the right argument?
Well, and I think anyone who is willing to act like a grown up
Yeah.
understands that in litigation, you can file an opposition to a motion to dismiss, and it's a Rule 12, and it clearly says the court is to put all inferences in the plaintiff's favor, and some courts don't.
Right.
They just won't. And so that's by way of saying, even if a case is a 10 out of 10 in the underwrite, it can lose.
It can.
And to me, so people will, would say to me, my gosh, Ted, this funding is so expensive. And I'd say, well, then why aren't you funding it?
Right.
If you're definitely going to win. So it's, and then look, I mean, I'm not saying it's cheap, don't get me wrong, but you can be right and lose. And that is just the story of US litigation. And so, all those things, are sort of rolled into the price. And so the attorneys who say, hey, we think we're right on this issue, but, there is law from out of circuit, and, the court could get there and, they could toss us, and then we're off the field for 2 years, even if it comes back on appeal. I mean, the other thing is, right, the time, Certum's, $4 million is in limbo for 2 years on appeal. And then you have the risk that the client will take a cheap walk away. So I get what you're saying. And I like the people who understand it's really difficult even to win big cases that are really good. They sometimes lose. And, what I have found in, really advisory work is what you are saying is a very common tale. Those lawyers are excellent. They are excellent, but they know there's going to be defenses, and they've thought about a lot of them, and they thought of stuff we didn't think about, or when they brought it up, that just, to me, that's just the recipe for success in the business.
It is. And I think this kind of goes back to, is again, my parallels with my clerkship, but again, because it was such a formative part of who I am as a lawyer and the way I think about cases, is there are lawyers in a courtroom, anyone who's been in a courtroom, sometimes it's been our opposing counsel, hopefully it's never been us, but it's a good portion of the bar, who don't listen to the judge's question. And the judge has a concern about something about their case, or about something on a motion for summary judgment, or on a motion to dismiss argument. And the response is sort of, nothing to see here, move on. Let me tell you why I win for some other reason.
Right.
And my point to anyone who is listening on this call, who is on the I'm a party seeking funding, is that matters to the funder. If I'm asking you, it matters, just like it matters to the judge. Just answer the question. You may not think it's relevant, but it's relevant to how I'm perceiving the case. Whether I'm perceiving the case the way you do is really irrelevant to the ultimate decision of whether I fund the case. I have to ultimately, as an underwriting team, and our team collectively has to be satisfied that we like the risk, just like a judge has to be satisfied with something. So it's so important. And this goes back to the partnership and the quality of lawyers, candor, and also just listen to what a funder is asking of you. And if you think it's a bizarre question, say it to yourself and just say, this is a really weird question, but I'm going to answer it because obviously it's important to this person. If you, as we say in Texas, bless your heart, right? If I am asking a question that's dumb, just say to yourself, bless her heart, and then answer my question.
Well,
that's it. Because then I'll say, okay, they're listening to me and I like this and they're engaged. And some of that may be subjective on my part, but at the end of the day, I'm the one advising our investment committee as to whether we should give you money or not. So make me happy, right? Like make me feel like, okay, this is good. And that's something that I will tell you, Tad. It's very interesting. Some of the most sophisticated, well-credentialed lawyers do a very bad job at that. But that's true in court too. I've seen it many times when I'm like, ooh, this lawyer's going to come and argue at a hearing. And then you hear them and you think, you're not really listening to the judge. And it's offensive. And, just, and then there's some less credentialed folk who are really, really good at saying, okay, that's what you want to answer. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you why, and then redirect, which we all do as lawyers, and we're good at that. But it's the sort of, if you think of a funding group, and we're not judges, but if that candor, and also we're lawyers and don't try to pull one over on us, right? That candor is just so important, and I cannot stress it enough. But it's also why I love this job, right? Because it is sort of like gloves off, let's talk about it. And that's fun too.
Right. Well, I had a case once where we had been on it for months, and the final call was with the investment committee, but really the deep pocket on the committee. And that deep pocket asked a question about a legal issue that we had run to ground 900 times a month before, and it wasn't even close. And my client just got up there and realized, we're asking for your money. You haven't been on the phone with us before. And they walked through in a very sort of calm way. And again, it wasn't a close question. It was in our favor. And, the deal closed, and I talked afterwards, and the person, so like the person would have been like your counterpart. So it'd be like, you called me and said, Ted, obviously we all knew the answer to that question. And it was, but this senior person likes to see that sometimes when you go to court, they haven't memorized your super important special brief, and you might get asked. So really, it was an audition for how they were going to handle that. All right, so let me ask you this: what is, or what are some of your, and I think you've touched on them, but why are you doing this besides practicing law? Like, what is it about this business for you that keeps you doing this? Because obviously, you could be back as a partner in a law firm. You could be seeking a judgeship. What is it?
So I will tell you, and this sounds so completely schmaltzy,
Oh,
but
here it comes. Here it comes. Let's hear
I
it.
have been overwhelmed by the quality of people in this industry. The people who are in, and that was probably counter to my original impressions when I first was at the firm and we were seeking funding, and I was thinking, is this really shady? Like, what is this? The quality of lawyers? I don't have to, and this sounds horrible, but there is no more unexpected phone call from a second-year associate about something. Like, all of us are sophisticated. All of us are smart. All of us have experiences. And the level of collaboration and intelligence is just not anything I experienced in practice. And point number 2 is why I'm doing this is I do not have to ever again deal with a discovery dispute.
Yeah.
Which, let me just say that when I left practice for clerking, I said I don't ever, that was a point where I thought I can't deal with discovery disputes anymore. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to practice again, and maybe they're not as bad as I remember. No. They are, in fact, as bad as I remember. And again, coming from my experience, they're so completely ridiculous, and there's so much posturing. And when I know how the court is perceiving me as a lawyer and often a friend of somebody in the court, they're horrible. So truthfully, I mean, I say it sort of tongue in cheek, but the fact that I never again have to deal with that or a ridiculous counterparty lawyer. I mean, opposing counsel, I guess. I mean, I'm so used to calling counterparties, but opposing counsel, the practice of law is not what it used to be. I think maybe we found a way to capture a lot of the collegiality, even when we're dealing in sort of it can get pretty adversarial and a lot of tugging back and forth. There is a level of collaboration that to me suits what makes me feel happy and satisfied and gratified with what I'm doing intellectually.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that was
Is that not what you expected?
No. And I think too, the interesting thing is a lot of the smart people you meet and you're not on opposing sides of a deal. So instead of, me meeting you and we're on both sides of the deal. Right. And I do write the dumbest discovery letter ever. I mean, I could do it and you could write a dumb one back and we could, it's such a waste of time after a while.
And then we could pretend to be friends. I mean, we could say, oh, this is my friend, and we're
your counsel.
Yes, right. But then it all comes down to there's just something, and I think probably any 75 plus year lawyer would tell you that discovery practices have ruined the practice of law. The idea of going to settle a case over a beer, all these legends that I heard, that doesn't happen anymore. But that sort of spirit is I feel like I've sort of found some of that spirit in this industry of, hey, we're going to work together again. So I'm going to be honest with you this time, Ted, because I want you to be honest with me the next time. And, I'm going to be kind to you because it will come back to me. That's how I function as a human anyway.
Yeah.
And so to put me in a place where maybe I'm either being treated or can't act fully in my sort of collaborative way is kind of professionally stifling. And here I feel like collaboration is key and figuring out problems is key. And so it suits me very well.
Interesting. Okay. I have two more hot ones for you. All right. So number one, what do you think is the biggest misconception / BS marketing campaign you see about the business?
So misconception, I think, is, and the sort of thing I have to kind of correct for is kind of goes to everything I've said, that it's sketchy, that it's easy to get funding. I think, or that
it's not easy.
Yeah. Or that it's not easy, maybe not the right word, that it's not thoughtfully done.
Right. Oh yeah.
The amount of work that and I'm saying and this may be the misconception by opponents of funding or those who are questioning it. I don't think parties, and mainly defendants, right, realize how many hoops plaintiffs seeking funding have to jump through in order to get even their foot in the door, right? Even to get considered for funding, and how much good, honest thought is put into it. That there's nothing about it. And I really tried very hard to make sure that everyone that I talk to understands that this is like really good, honest work. That there is nothing untoward or kind of, it seems like there's sort of like lots of shadows and feeling, but it's not. It's very, very full disclosure, candor. And I don't know that the funding industry has done the best job in the PR world of making sure everyone understands. And I think this goes back to the disclosure issue, which has been hotly debated, but I've always been in the minority of saying, why wouldn't you? And I know there are answers to it, so you don't have to tell me, but my sort of initial reaction is, why wouldn't you disclose that you have funding? It says you have a really good case. I mean,
right.
That somebody is willing to give you money that they're not going to get back because they believe the merits of your case are that strong. Now, again, I know there are many, many reasons that people are squawking right now when I say that, but I think that the message...
Let them squawk.
Yes, I think the message needs to be controlled to say, this is part of it. This is, again, every single party that we see usually is in a position of, we have been wronged by a bad company, and the bad company knows that we can't afford to hire an expert, and so now we're just going to be harmed and walk away. That's not justice. So I think that is the biggest misimpression, is that there is dark, dirty something going on behind the scenes that's just not. That's the message. And then was there a second part to your question?
Oh no, there's a part two. It's even a hotter one than that one. No, so all I was going to say is, I think that defendants actually do know all the work that goes into this, but for PR purposes, they just say that it's shadowy.
So I think that's the big, I think it's a PR. I think and I'm really working hard as somebody who, hopefully I'm known by my former colleagues and people I worked with, that I am ethics to me are important. Doing something right is important. And I want people to understand this is an industry where the right people and the quality of the people also feel the exact same way. Right? I mean, I'm sure there's some minority of folks, as there are in any industry, who I have not encountered them yet. I mean,
most of them worked at risk settlements, but they went out of business. So yeah, they're gone. We got rid of them.
What I was going to say was the second part of this. Is the misconception is, or the thing I would want people to know more, and was what I tell everyone is, it's just the quality and the intellect that's in this industry. And I'm not trying to, I'm saying every day I feel sort of like, wow, I'm humbled by the intelligence of the lawyers on this call, or the people in this industry. It's a lot of smart people looking at hard problems.
Right. Okay. So here's my last question. This might either be really good for you, it might get you in trouble, and this is a new one. So, who would be a good person for me to have on this podcast?
Well, I think. Have you had Lauren Harrison on this podcast?
I've not. Is that
Lauren Harrison is someone? So, as you know, and we've gotten to know each other more a little bit through this too.
I know her. I know her. She hasn't been on. I know her. Yeah.
Yes. I'm on the steering committee of WOLF, the Women of Litigation Finance. I've met some amazing women. Lauren is one of them. She is a former litigator. She's a fellow Texan. Well, she's not a Texan by birth, but she now lives here.
Right.
And she is a spitfire and fantastic, and she's with LFG.
Yeah.
And again, one thing I love about this industry is that we are able to collaborate so much with people who aren't in our particular companies.
Right.
So she is the person that I immediately thought of when you said that, just because she's fun and energetic and interesting, and her background is she handled a lot of high stakes cases before she came into funding, and she too made the transition.
Okay, well, she is now on the hot seat.
I tagged her as being it.
I'm going to send her the transcript. Okay, well, so Kirstine, I want insurance, or I want funding, or my company is in a class action and I want you to put a cap on my damages. How do I find you? Where do I go?
Yeah, so You can contact me at krogers@certumgroup.com. You can go to
Okay.
our website. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think
Okay.
my LinkedIn profile, you're very fond of referring to my first initial is
LKR.
LKR
LKR.
on my
That's right.
initials. So
Okay.
it's under LinkedIn, it's L Kirstine Rogers with Certum Group. Also happy to take phone calls. Should I give my
Sure.
phone number? 214-244-0237.
So
Call
Kirsten,
me.
at Certum, is it like walk-ins welcome, like no appointment?
Walk-ins welcome. Just give me
Walk
a
in?
call. Give
Okay.
me
All
a
right.
call and then I'll probably not answer it because I won't know who you are. But if you leave a
Perfect.
message, then I'll call you back or
Excellent.
whatever is easiest. We're always happy and we're of the spirit of come to any of us. We'll get you to the right person. We'll help you figure it out.
As long as Kirsten gets the origination credit, you can call anybody there, right?
I'm not an origination credit grubber. I'm just a problem solver, Ted.
Oh man, how can we not leave it at that? Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.